Hello, this is the next part of Longfellow's collection of poems, The Tales of a Wayside Inn. We're now up to The Musician's Tale. There's no interlude for this one. The Musician's Tale is the saga of King Olaf. Olaf the King one summer morn blew a blast on his bugle horn, sending his signal through the land of Drontheim. And to this husting held at Mere gathered the farmers far and near, with their war weapons ready to confront him. Ploughing under the morning star, old Iron-billed in Airia heard the summons, chuckling with a low laugh. He wiped the sweat drops from his brow, unharnessed the horses from the plough, and clattering came on horseback to King Olaf. He was the churliest of the churls, little he cared for king or earls, bitter as home-brewed ale were his foaming passions. Hodden grey was the garb he wore, and by the hammer of Thor he swore he hated the narrow town and all its fashions. But he loved the freedom of his farm, his ale at night by the fireside warm, Gudrun his daughter with her flaxen tresses. He loved his horses and his herds, the smell of earth and the song of birds, his well-filled barns, his brook with its water cresses. Huge and cumbersome was his frame, his beard, from which he took his name, frosty and fierce, like that of Hymir the giant. So at the husting he appeared, the farmer of Airia, iron-beard, on horseback in an attitude defiant. And to King Olaf he cried aloud out of the middle of the crowd that tossed about him like a stormy ocean, "Such sacrifices shalt thou bring to Odin and to Thor, O king, as other kings have done in their devotion." King Olaf answered, "I command this land to be a Christian land. Here is my bishop who the folk baptizes. But if you ask me to restore your sacrifices stained with gore, then will I offer human sacrifices. Not slaves and peasants shall they be, but men of note and high degree, such men as Orm of Lyra and Kar of Greiting." Then to their temple strode he in, and loud behind him heard the din of his men at arms and the peasants fiercely fighting. There in the temple carved in wood, the image of great Odin stood, and other gods with Thor supreme among them. King Olaf smote them with the blade of his huge war-axe, gold inlaid, and downward shattered to the pavement flung them. At the same moment rose without from the contending crowd a shout, a mingled sound of triumph and of wailing. And there upon the trampled plain the farmer Ironbeard lay slain, midway between the assailed and the assailing. King Olaf from the doorway spoke, "Choose ye between two things, my folk, to be baptized or given up to slaughter." And seeing their leader stark and dead, the people with a murmur said, "O king, baptize us with thy holy water." So all the Drontheim land became a Christian land in name and fame. In the old gods no more believing and trusting. And as a blood atonement soon King Olaf wed the fair Gudrun, and thus in peace ended the Drontheim husting. The building of the Long Serpent. Thorberg Skafting, master builder, in his shipyard by the sea, whistling said, "It would bewilder any man but Thorberg Skafting, and any man but me." Near him lay the dragon stranded, built of old by Raud the Strong, and King Olaf had commanded he should build another dragon twice as large and long. Therefore whistled Thorberg Skafting, as he sat with half-closed eyes and his head turned sideways drafting that new vessel for King Olaf, twice the dragon's size. Round him, busily hewed and hammered, mallet huge and heavy axe, workmen laughed and sang and clamoured, whirred the wheels that into rigging spun the shining flax. All this tumult heard the master, it was music to his ear. Fancy whispered all the faster, men shall hear of Thorberg scuffing for 100 year. 70 ells and 4 extended on the high grass the vessel's keel. High above it, gilt and splendid, rose the figurehead ferocious with its crest of steel. Then they launched her from the trestles in the shipyards of the sea. She was the grandest of all vessels. Never ship was built in Norway half so fine as she. The Long Serpent she was christened, mid the roar of cheer on cheer. They who to the saga listened heard the name of Thorberg Skafting for 100 year. King Svend of the Forked Beard. Loudly the sailors cheered Sven of the Forked Beard, as with his fleet he steered southward to Vendland, where with their courses hauled all were together called under the Isle of Svold, near to the mainland. After Queen Gunhild's death, so the old saga saith, plighted King Svend his faith to Sigrid the Haughty, and to avenge his bride, soothing her wounded pride, over the waters wide King Olaf sought he. Still on her scornful face, blushing with deep disgrace, bore she the crimson trace of Olaf's gauntlet. Like a malignant star blazing in heaven afar, red shone the angry scar under her frontlet. Oft to King Sven she spake, for thine own honour's sake shalt thou swift vengeance take on the vile coward. Until the king at last, gusty and overcast, like a tempestuous blast, threatened and lowered. Soon the spring appeared, Svend of the Forked Beard. High his red standard reared, eager for battle, while every warlike Dane, seizing his arms again, left all unsown the grain, unhoused the cattle. Likewise the Swedish king summoned in haste a thing, weapons and men to bring in aid of Denmark. Eric the Norseman too, as the war tidings flew, sailed with a chosen crew from Lapland and Finnmark. So upon Easter Day sailed the 3 kings away, out of the sheltered bay in the bright season. With them Earl Sigvald came, eager for spoil and fame. Pity that such a name stooped to such treason. Safe under Svald at last, now were their anchors cast, safe from the sea and blast, plotted the 3 kings, while with a base intent southward, Earl Sigvald went, on a foul errand bent unto the sea kings. Thence to hold on his course, unto King Olaf's force, lying within the horse mouths of Stethaven, him to ensnare who his dead corse would fling forth to the raven.
King Olaf and Earl Sigvald. On the grey sea sands King Olaf stands, northward and seaward he points with his hands, with eddy and whirl the sea tides curl, washing the sandals of Sigvald the Earl. The mariners shout, the ships swing about, the yards are all hoisted, the sails flutter out, the war horns are played, the anchors are weighed, like moths in the distance the sails flit and fade. The sea is like lead, the harbour lies dead, as a corse on the seashore whose spirit has fled. On that fatal day, the histories say, 70 vessels sailed out of the bay, but soon scattered wide o'er the billows they ride, while Sigvald and Olaf sail side by side. Cried the Earl, "Follow me!
I your pilot will be, for I know the channels where flows the deep sea. So into the strait where his flows lie in wait, gallant King Olaf sails to his fate. Then the sea fog veils the ships and their sails. Queen Sigrid the haughty, thy vengeance prevails. King Olaf. Strike the sails, King Olaf said. Never shall men of mine take flight, never
Away from battle I fled, never away from my foes. Let God dispose of my life in the fight. Sound the horns, said Olaf the king, and suddenly through the drifting broom, the blare of the horns began to ring, like the terrible trumpet shook of Ragnarok on the day of doom. Louder and louder the war horns sang. O'er the level floor of the flood, all the sails came down with a clang, and there in the mist overhead the sun hung red as a drop of blood. Drifting down on the Danish fleet, 3 together the ships were lashed, so that neither should turn and retreat. In the mists, but in the front of the rest, the burnished crests of the serpent flashed. King Olaf stood on the quarter deck, with bow of ash and arrows of oak. Bow of ash and arrows of oak. His gilded shield was without a fleck, his helmet inlaid with gold, and in many a fold hung his crimson cloak. On the forecastle Ulf the Red, watching the lashings of the ships. If the serpents lie so far ahead, we shall have hard work of it here, said he with a sneer on his bearded lips. King Olaf laid an arrow on stream. Have I a coward on board? Said he. Shoot it another way, O king, sullenly answered Ulf, the old sea wolf. You have need of me. In front came Svend, the king of the Danes, sweeping down with his 50 rowers, to the right the Swedish king with his thanes, and on board of the Iron Beard Earl Eric steered, to the left with his oars. These soft Danes and Swedes, said the king, at home with their wives had better stay than come within reach of my serpent's sting. But where Eric the Norseman leads, heroic deeds will be done today. Then, as together the vessels crashed, Eric severed the cables of hide with which King Olaf's ships were lashed, and left them to drive and drift with the current swift of the outward tide. Louder the war horns growl and snarl, sharper the dragons bite and sting. Eric, the son of Hakon Jarl, a death drink salt as the sea, pledges to thee, Olaf, the king. King Olaf's death drink. All day has the battle raged, all day have the ships engaged, but not yet is assuaged the vengeance of Eric the Earl. The decks with blood are red, the arrows of death are sped, the ships are filled with the dead, and the spears the champions hurl. They drift as wrecks on the tide, the grappling irons are plied, the boarders climb up the side, the shouts are feeble and few. Ah, never shall Norway again see her sailors come back over the main. They all lie wounded or slain, or asleep in the billows blue. On the deck stands Olaf the king, around him whistle and sing the spears that the foemen fling, and the stones they hurl with their hands. In the midst of the stones and the spears, Kolbjorn the marshal appears. His shield in the air he uprears, by the side of King Olaf he stands. Over the slippery wreck of the long serpent's deck sweeps Eric with hardly a check. His lips with anger are pale, he hews with his axe at the mast, till it falls with the sails overcast, like a snow-covered pine in the vast, dim forests of Orkadale. Seeking King Olaf then, he rushes aft with his men.
as a hunter into the den of the bear where he stands at bay. "Remember, Jarl, hearken!" he cries, when, lo, on his wondering eyes 2 kingly figures arise, 2 Olafs in warlike array. Then Kolbjorn speaks in his ear of King Olaf a word of cheer, in a whisper that none may hear, with a smile on his tremulous lips. 2 shields raised high in the air, 2 flashes of golden hair, 2 scarlet meteors glare, and both have leaped from the ship. Earl Eric's men in the boats seize Kolbjorn's shield as it floats, and cry from their hairy throats, "See, it is Olaf the King!" While far on the opposite side floats another shield on the tide, like a jewel set in the wide sea current's eddying ring. There is told a wonderful tale, how the king stripped off his mail, like leaves on the brown sea kale, and he swam beneath the main. But the young grew old and grey, and never by night or by day in his kingdom of Norway was King Olaf seen again. Interlude. A strain of music closed the tale, a low monotonous funeral wail, that with its cadence wild and sweet made the long saga more complete. "Thank God," the theologian said, "the reign of violence is dead, or dying surely from the world, while love triumphant reigns instead, and in a brighter sky overhead his blessed banners are unfurled." The Theologian's Tale. Torquemada. In the heroic days when Ferdinand and Isabella ruled the Spanish land, and Torquemada with his subtle brain ruled them as Grand Inquisitor of Spain, in a great castle near Valladolid, moated and high and by fair woodlands hid, there dwelt, as from the chronicles we learn, an old hidalgo, proud and taciturn, whose name has perished with his towers of stone, and all his actions save this one alone. This one, so terrible, perhaps 'twere best if it too were forgotten with the rest, unless perchance our eyes can see therein the martyrdom triumphant over sin. A double picture with its gloom and glow, the splendour overhead, the death below. This sombre man counted each day as lost, on which his feet no sacred threshold crossed. And when he chanced the passing host to meet, he knelt and prayed devoutly in the street. Oft he confessed, and with each mutinous thought, as with wild beasts at Ephesus, he fought, in deep contrition, scourged himself in Lent, walked in processions with his head down bent, at plays of Corpus Christi oft was seen, and on Palm Sundays bore his bough of green. His sole diversion was to hunt the boar, through tangled thickets of the forest hoar, or with his jingling mules to hurry down to some grand bullfight in the neighbouring town, or in the crowd with lighted tapers stand when Jews were burned, or banished from the land. Then stirred within him a tumultuous joy. The demon whose delight is to destroy shook him, and shouted with a trumpet note, "Kill, kill, and let the Lord find out his own." And now, in that old castle in the wood, his daughters, in the dawn of womanhood, returning from their convent school, had made resplendent with their bloom the forest shade, reminding him of their dead mother's face, when first she came into that gloomy place. A memory in his heart as dim and sweet as moonlight in a solitary street, where the same rays that lift the sea are thrown, lovely but powerless, upon walls of stone. These 2 fair daughters of a mother dead, were all the dream had left him as it fled, a joy at first, and then a growing care, as if a voice within him cried, "Beware!" A vague presentiment of impending doom, like ghostly footsteps in a vacant room, haunted him day and night, a formless fear that death to some one of his house was near, with dark surmises of a hidden crime, made life itself a death before its time. Jealous, suspicious, with no sense of shame, a spy upon his daughters he became. With velvet slippers noiseless on the floors, he glided softly through half-open doors. Now in the room, and now upon the stair, he stood beside them ere they were aware. He listened in the passage when they talked, he watched them from the casement when they walked. He saw the gypsy haunt the river's side. He saw the monk among the cork trees glide, and tortured by the mystery and the doubt of some dark secret past his finding out, baffled, he paused, then reassured again, pursued the flying phantom of his brain. He watched them even when they knelt in church, and then descending lower in his search, questioned the servants, and with eager eyes listened incredulous to their replies. The gypsy, none had seen her in the woods. The monk, a mendicant in search of food. At length the awful revelation came, crushing at once his pride of birth and name. The hopes his yearning bosom forward cast, and the ancestral glories of the past, all fell together, crumbling in disgrace, a turret rent from battlement to base. His daughters talking in the dead of night, in their own chamber, and without a light. Listening as he was wont, he overheard, and learned the dreadful secret word by word. And hurrying from his castle with a cry, he raised his hands to the unpitying sky, repeating one dread word till bush and tree caught it, and shuddering answered, "Heresy!" Wrapped in his cloak, his hat drawn o'er his face, hurrying forward now with lingering pace, he walked all night the alleys of his park, with one unseen companion in the dark, the demon, who within him lay in wait, and by his presence turned his love to hate, for ever muttering in an undertone, "Kill! Kill! And let the Lord find out his own." Upon the morrow, after early mass, while yet the dew was glistening on the grass, and all the woods were musical with birds, the old hidalgo, uttering fearful words, walked homeward with the priest, and in his room summoned his trembling daughters to their doom. When questioned, with brief answers they replied, nor when accused, evaded or denied. Expostulations, passionate appeals, all that the human heart most fears or feels, in vain the priest with earnest voice essayed. In vain the father threatened, wept, and prayed, until at last he said with haughty mien, "The Holy Office then must intervene." And now, the Grand Inquisitor of Spain, with all the 50 horsemen of his train, his awful name resounding like the blast of funeral trumpets as he onward passed, came to Valladolid, and there began to harry the rich Jews with fire and band. To him the hidalgo went, and at the gate demanded audience on affairs of state. and in the secret chamber stood before a venerable grey beard of fourscore, dressed in the hood and the habit of a friar. Out of his eyes flashed a consuming fire, and in his hand the mystic horn he held, which poison and all noxious charms dispelled. He heard in silence the hidalgo's tale, then answered in a voice which made him quail. Son of the church, when Abraham of old to sacrifice his only son was told, he did not pause to parley nor protest, but hastened to obey the Lord's behest. In him it was accounted righteousness. The Holy Church expects of thee no less. A sacred frenzy seized the father's brain, and mercy from that hour implored in vain. Oh, who will e'er believe the words I say? His daughters he accused, and the same day they both were cast into the dungeon's gloom, that dismal antechamber of the tomb, arraigned, condemned, and sentenced to the flame. The secret torture and the public shame. Then to the Grand Inquisitor once more the hidalgo went, more eager than before, and said, When Abraham offered up his son, he clave the wood wherewith it might be done. By his example taught that me too bring wood from the forest for my offering. And the deep voice, without a pause, replied, Son of the church, by faith now justified, complete thy sacrifice, even as thou wilt. The church absolves thy conscience from all guilt. Then this most wretched father went his way into the woods that round his castle lay, where once his daughters in their childhood played with their young mother in the sun and shade. Now all the leaves had fallen, the branches bare made a perpetual moaning in the air. The screaming from their eyries overhead, the raven sailed athwart the sky of lead. With his own hand he lopped the boughs and bound faggots that crackled with foreboding sound, and on his mules, caparisoned and gay with bells and tassels, sent them on their way. Then with his mind on one dark purpose bent, then to the Inquisitor he went, and said, Behold the faggots I have brought, and now, lest my atonement be as naught, grant me one more request, one last desire, with my own hand to light the funeral fire. And Torquemada answered from his seat, Son of the church, thine offering is complete. Her servants through all ages shall not cease to magnify thy deed. Depart in peace. Upon the marketplace, builded of stone, the scaffold rose, whereon death claimed his own. At the four corners in stern attitude, 4 statues of the Hebrew prophets stood, gazing with calm indifference in their eyes upon this place of human sacrifice, round which was gathered fast the eager crowd, with clamour of voices dissonant and loud, and every roof and window was alive with restless gazers, swarming like a hive. The church bells tolled, the chant of monks drew near, loud trumpets stammered forth their notes of fear, a line of torches smoked along the street, there was a stir, a rush, a tramp of feet, and with its banners floating in the air, slowly the long procession crossed the square, and to the statues of the prophets bound, the victims stood, with faggots piled around. And then all the air a blast of trumpets shook, and louder sang the monks with bell and book. And the hidalgo, lofty, stern and proud, lifted his torch, and, bustling through the crowd, lighted it in haste, the faggots, and then fled, lest those imploring eyes should strike him dead. Oh, pitiless skies, why did your clouds retain for peasants' fields their floods of hoarded rain? Oh, pitiless earth, why open no abyss to bury in its chasms a crime like this? That night a mingled column of fire and smoke from the dark thickets of the forest broke, and glaring o'er the landscapes leagues away, made all the fields and hamlets bright as day. Wrapped in a sheet of flame the castle blazed, and as the villagers in terror gazed, they saw the figure of that cruel knight lean from a window in the turret's height, his face ghastly illumined with the glare, his hands upraised above his head in prayer, till the floor sank beneath him, and he fell down the black hollow of that burning well. 3 centuries and more above his bones have piled the oblivious years like funeral stones. His name has perished with him, and no trace remains on earth of his afflicted race. But Torquemada's name, with clouds o'ercast, looms in the distant landscape of the past, like a burnt tower upon a blackened heath, lit by the fires of burning woods beneath. The Interlude. Thus closed the tale of guilt and gloom that cast upon each listener's face its shadow, and for some brief space unspoken silence filled the room. The Jew was thoughtful and distressed. Upon his memory thronged and pressed the persecution of his race, their wrongs and sufferings and disgrace. His head was sunk upon his breast, and from his eyes alternate came flashes of wrath and tears of shame. The student first the silence broke, as one who long has lain in wait with purpose to retaliate, and thus he dealt the avenging stroke. In such company as this, a tale so tragic seems amiss, that by its terrible control masters and drags down the soul into a fathomless abyss. The Italian tales that you disdain, some merry knight of Straparole or Machiavelli's Belphegor would cheer us and delight us more, give greater pleasure and less pain than your grim tragedies of Spain. And here the poet raised his hand with such entreaty and command it stopped discussion at its birth, and said, "The story I shall tell has meaning in it, if not mirth. Listen and hear what once befell the merry birds of Killingworth."